Hello, friends.
Hey, Ian.
Got some more folks coming in. Welcome. Our patch of stakeholders continues to grow, much like a pumpkin patch for the spooky season. We had 33 folks signed up. Looks like we're getting about halfway there, and we'll start in a little bit regardless. Couple folks trickling in. There's a few more. Hello, everyone joining us. All right, we got a good amount of folks now, and it's 11:03, so we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you all for attending this Redmond 2050-2025 code package. This is the second of two workshops looking at affordability specifically for our downtown, Marymore, and mixed-use zones. I'm joined today not by Becky Fry, but by long-range planning manager Jeff Churchill, who's going to be helping with links and note-taking as we move through the process. As a quick reminder, our previous workshop, we shared out some of the implications of our affordability parameters, our expected impacts, and a baseline review of what the zones actually intend to produce, both in terms of quantity of residential units, commercial space, and also the built environment of those zones. Today, we're going to provide a summary of where we were, what we've received so far from the stakeholder feedback. If at any point we have any questions, please pop them in the chat and we'll get to them in an orderly manner. We also have our raise hand feature, and I'll be trying to keep an eye on both. So our agenda for today, we'll walk through the policy goals just to reset the table, talk about the initial project summary, recommendation and impacts, again as a refresher. Then we'll move into 3 and 4, which is where we'll speak to the feedback we've received so far. Right off the bat, one of the policy goals, why does the city pursue affordability parameters, whether that's mandatory inclusionary zoning or our voluntary multifamily property tax exemption program? Ultimately, it's a community priority and it's about improving equity through housing security. The recent direction for the city of Redmond has to focus our efforts at deeper levels of area median income, that's AMI. Historically, the city has had much success with our inclusionary zoning at 80% AMI, and now we're looking at more of the 50% area. The reason being that we see the lower the AMI of the household, the greater the risk of being cost burdened and the risk of associated housing insecurity. We want housing to be built. That's a message that we hope resonates inside the hearts of everyone on this call. Whether you're a for-profit developer, a nonprofit developer, we're all in this together in that we want to see development occur. We recognize that current economic conditions are unfavorable to development. It's been a rough few years. Um, and the city recognizes that the amendment package in front of us today, it cannot and does not intend to fix the broader economic conditions. There's just a lot of things outside the city's control. And so we're trying to focus on helping development because the amendment parameters with the associated increase in development capacity are modeled to result in similar or better yield on cost as current additions. So as a whole, Redmond 2050 intends to help move development forward. The project summary, we have our code amendment package of downtown Redmond mixed zones. We have a more detailed key dates slide later in the presentation, but up front, we'll say the expected adoption is in Q2 of 2025. The modeling assumes base development capacity. So our robust incentive package, which is also currently being drafted, is not included. In addition, other factors like the transit-oriented development or TOD focus areas, which provide greater development capacity, are also not included. As such, when we look at the workings of these analyses, please keep in mind that it's assuming the very baseline amount of development capacity, and as such, we would expect plausibly better financial returns than what is modeled. Number three, the affordability recommendations offer similar or better yield on cost as the status quo. There are no proposed changes to the downtown affordability requirements, and we're continuing to observe the mixed-use zones. This slide is the same slide that was presented at the first of the two housing workshops earlier this month. As you can see, no change to downtown, no change to mandatory corridor mixed use, and broadly there's a shift towards pursuing those 50% AMI units for Marymore and the mixed use zones. The draft impacts, I recognize there's a lot of numbers on this slide. The takeaway is that the yield on cost improves, except for the corridor mixed use, and the benefit ratio is higher. As a reminder, the benefit ratio is one metric that we use when looking to evaluate staff proposals, and it considers the added value that amendments have for development divided by the perceived cost associated with affordability context. As such, the city tries to pursue strategies where we have greater than a 1.0 benefit ratio, because that means the development community is receiving more benefit than they are costs. And as such, the city believes this helps move development towards more feasibility. For the feedback summary, as a reminder, we shared out this slide deck and the associated financial feasibility models with our stakeholder groups. What we've heard so far includes our model feedback, discussion about the importance of incentives, questions and concerns with parking, and overall observations about the two mixed-use zones. So for this slide, staff requests just a double check about some of the key inputs. We did not receive many pieces of feedback that specifically spoke to these assumptions. And so we want to make sure that they do in fact seem reliable and reasonable. That's our interpretation from the fact that we didn't receive major concerns about these. So again, this slide will be shared out after the presentation, and we will be soliciting community feedback for this first round of the iterative drafts through the end of the month. So you will have time to take these numbers and review them yourselves, compare them to your own proprietary information, and you can provide the city staff with feedback of whether or not these seem like reasonable assumption inputs. Importance of incentives. We heard loud and clear from stakeholders that there is an appreciation for and a high value placed on the city's incentive efforts, both the existing and the ongoing development packages, um, to have a opportunity to provide development with flexibility in terms of how they can achieve that feasibility. We've also heard that achieving the max FAR and height is one, important for the financial feasibility of development, two, relatively easy to achieve under the current system, and three, would hope that that continues to move forward, right? And that last bullet point, concern that incentives won't get used because they'll be too expensive, that speaks to, again, a core project approach that the City of Redmond staff endeavors to do, which is more is being given to development than is being asked in return, right? Like if an incentive is too onerous, obviously no one will do it. And if that's the case, then the city doesn't get the outcomes it wants and development doesn't get the development it seeks. Jeff, yes.
Hey, Ian, thanks. I wanted to add um, one piece of information on that, and that is that the incentive proposal for downtown Marymount mixed-use zones, like actual red lines, would be available around the beginning of November. So that would be a good opportunity to kind of check that yourself and what you believe, how you believe the incentives program has been designed to make sure that it is providing um, more enough value to make them worthwhile. And then I wanted to let you know, Ian, there's a couple of questions in the chat in case you hadn't seen those.
Patrick asks, are those hard cost numbers intended to include structured parking? The answer is that the model has a distinct area for the construction of parking so that we can uh, have more precision with the modeling. That includes being able to adjust between surface parking and structured parking. So my understanding is that those assumptions that were just placed on the screen are not inclusive of structured parking, but I will double check the modeling for you after the meeting. Matt Corsi asked, please let us know the number of stories you are assuming for low rise versus mid rise. Can do. Low rise typically is up to about 4 stories. Mid rise is, when you get to that 5/1 level construction. Matt asks, hi, this is Matt from AMLI. Our current mid-rise project under construction is more than 450 square foot per hard cost. That is using net rentable square foot for a metric, much more than the 290 square foot shown. Thank you for that, Matt. We will record that and integrate that into our analyses. Do you also have some historical data, right? It sounds like that 450 cost was from your current project. Do you have recent history projects as well? We'll keep an eye on the chat. The number includes structured parking at a 1-to-1 parking ratio. Understood. That ties nicely into our second piece of feedback. Much ado about parking. Uh, there was feedback about bonus height for above ground infrastructure parking, especially in our dewatering areas. Thank you, Chelsea. If you have recommendations, I would be happy to update my language. Thank you for sharing that. Now that we know better, we can do better. So back to the feedback on parking. The participants in this iterative collaboration, again, talked a lot about the cost of above ground parking, especially in structure and especially in areas that are in the geographic areas of our city that are subject to dewatering. As a reminder, the city of Redmond gets much of our drinking water from the natural water wells of our city, and we have aquifers that are relatively high to the surface. and as such, we need to take special precautions to preserve that quality of water. Stakeholders also know there can be a tension between first floor commercial requirements and tenant amenities and the space for parking. And as the chat here today continues to show, right, we recognize that the cost of parking is quite high. Now, the requirements for parking generally citywide are going to decrease in the areas of our urban centers and areas near high capacity transit. With that said, we've also had conversations with our development partners that at this time it seems like lenders are still looking for at least a 0.7 ratio. And so we understand that those two have yet to fully align. But we appreciate all of the collaborators' input on the importance of parking, and we'll continue to review and iterate into our process. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, two comments. It's not just the lenders. The tenants of luxury apartments also want parking because even if they take transit during the week, they will want access to cars on weekends. Secondly, as it relates to dewatering, as I've shared with you in writing, the dewatering issue is a seasonal issue, not a year-round issue. And I'm wondering if staff has considered, rather than creating an outright prohibition on dewatering, simply making it a seasonal prohibition, because the seasonality of the dewatering issue relates to the low rainfall months when the aquifer doesn't get recharged, when well 4 tends to suck air, and where dewatering can cause reverse groundwater flows in the aquifer.
Jeff, would you be able to speak to that?
See, and Tom, I know that we sent the comments that you provided in writing to the public works staff working on the revisions to the stormwater municipal code, and we're intending to respond in writing later this week. I'm sure that response will include kind of their opinion on kind of how the seasonality affects the proposed regulations that haven't actually been drafted yet, but that they're working on.
Okay, thank you.
Our interested parties also expressed curiosity, some trepidation, and just general, I would say the majority of the feedback about our mixed-use zones. As a reminder, our variety of non-center mixed-use zones, so zones that are outside of the city centers broadly, we have these two new types that are consolidated efforts. The urban mixed-use zone is intended to be a preservation of the big box retail stores that currently exist just north of Marymore, while integrating housing and residential within them. So the general intent of that zone is big box retail mixed use with retail, while the corridor mixed use are more odds and ends parcels that are relatively low height, probably 4 to 5 stories, where there would be more conventional mixed use that we've seen. And our interested parties expressed a recognition that big box retail store mixed use has worked elsewhere in the country, but still some concern about whether the time is right in Redmond proper. By that, they mean just like whether the actual feasibility and market demand will support it. And as such, there was an emphasis that incentives may need to be especially generous for the urban mixed-use zone to ensure development occurs, possibly a catalyst provision. But the theme there is that stakeholders wanted us to keep observing that specific zone. And there was also a concern that requiring non-residential uses in the corridor mixed-use developments results in unfeasible financials for development at base capacity. We're reviewing some of the cost assumptions there as well, based on stakeholder feedback, and we did notice that the impact of commercial on these developments, because the modeling assumes a relatively low 4-story development, typically shows much greater financial feasibility if there is no commercial. So staff is integrating that into our review as well. Petco writes, what about neighborhood mixed use? Great question. Neighborhood mixed use is being analyzed in the context of these affordability requirements separately than these. The reason is the neighborhood mixed use is a much smaller scale than even the corridor mixed use. And so this specific workshop in front of us today is not inclusive of the neighborhood mixed use. Broadly, the affordability requirements will be very similar to what is proposed for neighborhood residential. Some key dates. For the remainder of October, we've got more workshops. I would like to especially draw your attention to Thursday, October 31st, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., which is where we will have more discussion on incentives and green building. I highly encourage the participants of this workshop to attend that workshop. The overall effort is to facilitate development and move it towards feasibility while recognizing the limited scope of local jurisdictions within the broader economy and balancing it with other community priorities. The incentive program is pretty impressive, if I say so myself. Becky has done a great job, and it's designed to be a menu framework such that unique considerations of each development can have relatively customizable approaches to actually receiving those incentive points. There will be continued internal review of the models and draft recommendations. We're going to integrate the feedback provided by our interested parties today and in recent history. The community feedback, please keep that coming in. You know, this workshop is not the shutoff date for any of your input. Ideally, we would like to get the bulk of your input by the end of the month, because we're going to be taking these through Planning Commission at the start of November. And then, of course, the tentative timeline is that we will actually reach full adoption in the second quarter of 2025. And with that, I would like to pause and loop back and hold space for a conversation with all of you. Matt put in the chat that their Overlake project currently is in entitlements, and it's about the same dollars net rentable square foot hard cost as mentioned above. 5 floors of wood over 3 floors of concrete. Yep, that classic typology that we see. 1 level of below grade parking. If we separate parking from residential and assigning foundation cost proportionally, the residential without parking is higher on a per square foot basis than the parking cost due to exterior materials, MFB systems, and unit finishes. Matt, if you don't mind me asking, what is the ratio for that development?
Parking ratio?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Parking ratio, depending on how you look at tandem stalls, is about a 0.74, I believe.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, if you include tandems as 2 stalls, it's about a 0.8. But we typically don't do that because only 1 unit will rent a tandem stall. You can't have 2 units renting a tandem because they have conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get to reviewing your model. I mean, I run over Lake Square looking at it like we took the incentives, we have a cost for that that's very accurate. And then if we add the new affordability requirements, my land price would have to drop something like 40% in order for the project to make sense. So definitely not accretive. So I need to formulate some comments and send them to you on how you guys looked at this.
Understood. And we appreciate you taking that time out of your busy schedule to provide that expert insight so we can have the best collaborative process to get the best outcomes that we can. Tom, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Matt said. I put in the chat our project, which is getting close to completion. Our construction hard costs per rentable square foot of residential are at 466. And our parking ratio is just a tad under 0.9. So, our costs are, appreciably higher than you have in your model. I was also going to mention in my brief review so far of your models, I believe that you have your leverage in your construction loan at about 70%, and I think probably 60% is more realistic. And you've already addressed in your comments on urban mixed use and the impact of including commercial with residential. And as I recall, your cost per unit is like between $1.1 million and $1.2 million. I also noted on Marymore Edge that your cost per unit is over $1 million. And I just wonder if you've looked at that in the context of the feasibility of residential in those areas.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing that in writing. That makes it easier to aggregate. And the intent is that we're going to collaborate with our Arch partners to review the models based on the feedback we've received. And that is certainly one area that we're going to take another deep look at.
Okay.
Way. Yep, Way, you're next.
Okay, let me turn on. Can you hear?
Yep.
Okay. So my question is, about the parking and the base height limitation for Miramar Core. So the water table is a problem, dewater is a problem. I mean, and there's probably working on some alternative about the seasonal, echo Tom's comments. But if you cap 65 feet, and also the city asking for ground level retail, office, and above ground parking, all this is contradictory to unit yields. Very heavy burden for the unit yield. If this is a materialized with a number, so you added a height doesn't really help. This overall probably turn to be a negative, those two policies, above ground parking and lots of retail on the ground. Those gonna reduce the unit yields. As consequence, you raise about the baseline height doesn't help. Does that make sense? We were gonna come up with the numbers, but this is overall we feel about that.
Is there a height limit that you think it would help?
Well, we're all talking about the number 400 something is all about wood frame construction. That's only working for the rental with that structure cost, right? So if that is a cap by the building code, I think that should be the baseline number. And any incentive you're going to use going to be for mass timber beyond 85 feet. Anything else, that probably be help.
Understood. Thank you for that feedback.
Okay. We'll need the numbers to support that. Thank
Right.
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelsey asks, one of your earlier slides stated that affordability recommendations offer similar or better yield on cost as status quo. Can you clarify what is meant by status quo? Is this a cost in comparison of developing affordable multifamily housing units to that of detached single-family housing units? No, Chelsea. This looks at comparing the maximum development capacity of a for-profit structure to a for-profit structure max development capacity between the current development standards and the proposed development standards. So for example, as a silly example, if there was a zone that allowed one dwelling unit per story, and you only allowed one story under the current codes, but then the proposed code allowed 5 stories of 10 units, right? We would compare the 1 versus the 50. So it's looking at the max development capacity baselines of the current code and the proposed code. Importantly for this work is that it looks at the costs of development, the expected return of development, and the implications of affordability requirements on those factors. Please let me know if that explanation satisfied your question. Thank you. Tom, back to you.
Thank you, Ian. In the previous workshop, not yours, but the hour prior to this one, Becky indicated that in areas where dewatering would occur, and apparently those areas are still being defined by staff, that the above grade height bonus would be 1 story. And I know I've emailed you, so this may be a little repetitive, but what we find, and again, as the previous gentleman commented, that because of the requirement to wrap um, above grade with either residential units or commercial space, that you don't get the same parking efficiency you do with below grade parking. You know, when you take into account ramps and circulation and whatever, you lose about half the parking volume. And so, in order to have a comparable offset with the elimination of below grade, you you really do need more than 1 story, unless uh, the code is changed to eliminate what I'll call the wrapping requirement. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a consideration.
Thank you. We'll discuss that wrapping topic as we continue to iterate on those parking pieces. Philip asks, it seems like parking is a massive problem. Has the city considered more robust interventions to alleviate developers from this burden? Oop. For example, neighborhood public parking, valet services, etc. Related to that, walking around the city with a bunch of above ground parking is fugly. Um, I will defer to Jeff to discuss more about parking management.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, a few things that are happening. One is that the off-street parking requirements will be reduced or eliminated in January if the council takes action expected in November. So then it becomes kind of what the market demands, not what the city is requiring. The city, in partnership with Metro and Hopeling, did roll out a community van to help people get around town without a car, especially downtown. So that's active now. And there are kind of maybe some other ideas kind of in being workshopped. The other thing that the council will take action on in November is authorizing pay parking on street. That won't actually make any parking paid, but it would make it possible because there is supply on the street that's getting used up all day that could get turned over so that there are effectively more spaces to park, more ways to get to businesses that people want to patronize. Getting more turnover on the street will get a better use out of the land that's being devoted to that parking today. So those are a few things we're looking at.
Thank you, Jeff. David asks, is the quantity of affordable units determined by the number of the market rate units rather than the total number of units? The latter factors affordables into the equation and double counts units. It inflates the cost of providing affordables. Yeah, David, I know we've had some email conversations about this, and I apologize for not being clear enough to answer it. So let me take another crack at it. You do not double count the affordable units, right? So if you have a development that proposes 50 dwelling units, we would then say, okay, X% of those must be affordable. We don't start with, typically the process is that a developer comes in and shares how many dwelling units they think they can get on the site for their specific considerations. And then we just apply that percentage approach to the total. So we don't like reverse engineer up from market rate units. But the key there, I think, for you is that it does not double count affordable housing units. Please let me know if that helped. I'm hoping to get clarity for you.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. I feel like if you're coming in providing 57 units, market rate units, you do the math and you need to build 7 affordables. I believe that's right. Well, now 7 affordables plus 57 units is add that up and then multiply it out. You end up having to build 7 affordable units plus, make a payment of 3/4 or 85% of the next unit. So, you come in there, cards on the table, got to hit 57 market units. I know I need to give you 6 or 7 affordables, and then you get those affordables added onto the count and refactor back into the equation. So yeah, I feel like it does count it twice.
Happy to continue that conversation. We'll get to the bottom of it.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate the input. For Redmond, parking is still a market demand for a long time. Even though there's zero parking requirement, we still have to provide about 1-to-1. Thank you for that perspective. Parking is, as you can tell, a passionate topic and an important topic for development consideration. And related, I would like to quickly ask the collaborators on this call for the like $450 to $466 per square foot hard costs. Are those figures that were provided, do those hard costs include parking? I think that was Tom, Matt, and Matt. 2 Matts, 1 Tom.
This is Matt with Amley, and the 450, above 450 I quoted did include parking with a 1-to-1 structured parking, a 1-to-1 ratio, and I laid that out. And you asked about current, that was priced at the end of 23 or mid 23 to end of 23. And, we haven't priced anything more. We have heard in the market, maybe there's a 5% drop in costs, but that's only a kind of current update that I've heard recently.
Awesome. Thank you for that additional detail. Yeah, that 5% seems okay. Not really worth losing too much sleep over.
Ian, this is Tom. My 466 did include parking.
Perfect. Thank you.
Same with Overlake Square. It's about right around the 450, 460 mark right now. Includes parking.
Perfect. Thank you all for that clarity. Other thoughts, reactions, curiosities? Okay. Well, I will not keep you longer than you are, and I want to just emphasize our invitation for continued collaboration and communication. This 2025 code package is important and impacts some very vibrant areas of the city that provide a lot of opportunities for our community priorities. So again, key things to consider. Please sign up for more of those Redmond 2050 workshops, especially the incentives. 2, please feel free to submit feedback pretty much whenever. Ideally, we'd like to wrap up most of it for this iteration before the end of the month, but just send that in. Please send it to me and CC Becky Fry or Jeff Churchill. And if you have any other questions or comments, I hope to chat soon. Thank you all so much for your time and your participation.
Thanks, Ian and Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.